Thanks for being here. And again, Carl, thanks very much for your time and effort in doing these sessions. And on that note, we'll let you present your lesson for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. It's actually my pleasure to do this. It causes me to study harder than I would otherwise do. So today we're doing Articles of Faith and Official Declarations 1 and 2, which is a little bit different. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Articles of Faith because I think that they've been covered. There's a great book that you can read by famous people. So tonight, what I thought I'd do, if you guys in the audience have any of your favorite things, stories, scriptures, whatever for this week, we'll start off with that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the Articles of Faith. And then in as much as these official declarations are about receiving revelation, thought we'd spend some time on that, and then talk about how the Lord's timing can be very, very different than ours, the restrictions on the priesthood, and then I want to spend some time talking about after. So that's kind of the format that I've outlined for tonight. Does anybody have anything that they would like to share from this week's reading or stories or whatever they'd like?
I do, Carl. So and maybe you can help me understand this, but I really enjoy the descriptions that's condensed in the two introductions in the two declarations. Just like how, like for Declaration 1, what a great description of, in a paragraph about the whole plural marriage thing. And then for Declaration 2 about the whole issue around priesthood restrictions. But I just want to also point out, like, these are so wonderful, but you know what? They must be new, because I'm looking at Sue's hard copy here of her triple, and they're not in there. But
that's exactly correct. They came out in 2013.
Right. I thought it was something like that. But aren't they wonderful? Like, what a great, in fact, I really like how in the second one, they even state there that a few Black male members were ordained to the priesthood during Joseph Smith's lifetime. Like, that's not something that many of us know unless we do go digging into those essays. But isn't it great that they've added those in? And okay, so it was only about 8 years ago. Interesting.
Yes, my understanding is that with the opening of the Joseph Smith papers and the way the church has really opened up everything to everybody and released all kinds of information, that they thought it was very appropriate to go back and amend some of the headings, which they have done. And I've noticed it a few times in the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants, although I haven't really highlighted it. But as you have today, Rod, that it's been very, very enlightening to see how the church has just kind of opened up. When I was young in the church, which is decades ago, there were certain topics that just weren't talked about. And now the church is just like, let it all out. Let everybody understand what happened.
Or worse, Carl, we talked about them, but we had it all wrong.
We had it wrong. Yeah, we speculated.
we speculated poorly.
Yeah, very poorly. I appreciate you making that comment. It's very, very interesting.
Well, just to bring that to closure, so if anybody doesn't have a copy of the scriptures that has those introductions, then they should go online and go to a current version of the scriptures, either on their phone or on the website, and look at those introductions. They're great if you have not read them.
Anyway, we did cover it in my Sunday lesson, or you could just watch my Sunday lesson, which was good.
Okay. But if you want to read them again.
Okay, I've discovered the 14th article of faith. We believe in meetings. All that have been scheduled, all that are now scheduled. We believe that there will be many great and important meetings. We have endured many meetings and hope to be able to endure all meetings. If there is a meeting, we seek after it. I just never heard that before, and I found it on the internet. I thought that's too good to pass up. The 13 articles of faith are very, very interesting. The way they're delineated, the way that they're lined up is just awesome. And as I've already indicated, you could spend months just talking about the articles of faith. Anybody else have a story about the articles of faith that they'd like to share? I know that when I was growing up, we were quizzed. We had to kind of know the articles of faith. When I went to primary, they drilled it into us, which was fine. But I was only in primary for a year. And so I had to master the articles of faith because they said, the bishop's going to ask you to recite some of them. This particular talk goes on and he says, I'm wondering how many of you know the articles of faith? How many of you big men, this was a priesthood meeting, as well as little men, do you know them? Have you repeated them? You're always prepared with a sermon when you know the articles of faith. And they are basic, aren't they? And I would think it would be a wonderful thing if all boys, as they learn them, or girls, would learn them word perfect. It's interesting because I know that I don't know when they did it, but they changed a couple of the words. And I still comes to my memory the old words. But I've appreciated knowing the articles of faith. It's saved my bacon a few times.
And Carl, you mentioned the book. Well, you didn't know the author, but yeah, James E. Talmage's book, The Article of Faith. I have read it. It's an excellent book to read about the gospel as he walks through each 13 of the articles of faith in great detail.
It's an amazing book. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about a particular discourse that was given in April 2012 by Elder Scott on how to obtain revelation and inspiration for your personal life. And the reason that I want to talk about it is because really these official declarations were massive revelations that were received that changed the course of the history of the church. And so I thought that if we spent a little bit of time studying how the prophets received this revelation, that it might help us in receiving inspiration and revelation for our life today. This is part of the talk that Elder Scott gave. When I am faced with a very difficult matter, this is how I try to understand what to do. I fast. I pray to find and understand scriptures that will be helpful. That process is cyclical. I start reading a passage of scripture. I ponder what the verse means and pray for inspiration. I then ponder and pray to know if I've captured all the Lord wants me to do. Often, more impressions come with increased understanding of doctrine. I have found the pattern to be a good way to learn from the scriptures. So this idea that first he identifies exactly what the problem is, and then he prays to understand from the scriptures what he could do. And then he goes through this process of praying and fasting and reading and praying and fasting and reading until he then queries the Lord, have I got it all? Because the intent of this particular section of his talk was that we don't always get it the first time around, that it's a line upon line, precept on precept. And if there's nothing else that we've learned from the Doctrine and Covenants this year, it's that the Lord doesn't just give you a big mental dump all at once of everything. He does it very, very slowly and incrementally, allowing you to kind of digest it and understand it before he moves you to the next level. Any thoughts on that?
Not only to understand and think about it, but also just to try to live it and apply it in our lives so that we can grow from it. And then he adds sort of the next level.
A good point. So he doesn't just give it to you and then the next one. He gives it to you and says, now live that. And some time can pass. And then he gives you another section and lives that. And then you live that. And then time passes. And that's really important because I think we live in an instant society today and we want it now. We want it yesterday. I was listening to a comedian the other day on one of the programs, and he was saying that, he wants his delivery at his door the day before he thinks about it. Like he wants Amazon to know him so well that they deliver to his door the day before he knows he needs it. Like that's the kind of society we live in. We expect them to deliver instantly, and the Lord doesn't work like that. If you go through his talk, which is very interesting, he gives some other clues. There are some practical principles that enhance revelation. First, yielding to emotions such as anger or hurt or defensiveness will drive away the Holy Ghost. Those emotions must be eliminated or our chance of receiving revelation is slight. Another principle is to be cautious with humor. Loud, inappropriate laughter will often offend the spirit. A good sense of humor helps revelation. Loud laughter does not. A sense of humor is an escape valve for the pressures of life. Another enemy to revelation comes from exaggeration or loudness in what is stated. Careful, quiet speech will favor the receipt of revelations. I know that when I get emotional or angry or negative emotions, that really impedes my ability to receive not only revelation, but good counsel from anybody. When you're angry like that, the Holy Ghost just doesn't want to be part of it. I like humor. I really do. I enjoy humor. I think it's because I'm a middle child and I was the peacemaker at home. And so I use humor quite a lot, but it can get out of control sometimes.
Just another thought. Humor, I think, is good as long as it's not at the expense of anybody.
Yeah, it can be hurtful. On the other hand, spiritual communication, I was surprised by this, can be enhanced by good health practices. Exercise, reasonable amounts of sleep, and good eating habits increase our capacity to receive and understand revelation. We will live for our appointed lifespan. However, we can improve both the quality of our service and our well-being by making careful and appropriate choices. I can't remember who it was that pointed out to me that in the last little while, there were two apostles in particular that had lost a fair amount of weight. And it came out that President Nelson went to them directly and said to them, you need to look after your health better. The Lord has called you as an apostle, as a special witness. We expect you to be around for a while. And so you need to get that under control. And they have, which was very interesting. It's important that our daily activities do not distract us from listening to the Spirit. We must not do anything that's going to drive the Spirit away because we can't afford it. It's too dangerous. Yeah, it was Elder Renland and also Elder Soares, I think was the other one. Communication with our Father in heaven is not a trivial matter. It's a sacred privilege. It is based upon eternal, unchanging principles. We receive help from our Father in heaven in response to our faith, obedience, and the proper use of agency. May the Lord inspire you to understand and use the principles that lead to personal revelation and inspiration, was the way that he ended that particular talk. And if you carefully look at these two official declarations, you'll note some very interesting patterns. And so we'll see this. We're studying these revelations. I realize that timing is so very critical, and it's the Lord's timing. We have to have faith not only in what the Lord wants us to do, but in the timing that's involved. And I was listening to a podcast from Ahmad Corbett. I don't know if you know him. He is the first counselor in the Young Men's Presidency. He gave a talk, I think, just last conference or the conference before. But he was born Islamic and then was converted to Christianity. And then his mother let the missionaries in, and then he converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But he talks about when he was 15 years old that he had a dream, and the dream was so impressed upon him that when he got up in the morning, it was a Sunday morning, he felt called of the Lord. He put on a clean shirt and pants and went to church. I think he said the closest church was 2 blocks away. It was a Roman Catholic church, and he felt called to go. And that was the same week where President Kimball received the revelation that everybody could have the priesthood. And so he felt called at that same week that he had to do something special. So 2,500 miles away, the apostles and prophets were announcing the end of priesthood restrictions. And then somebody else on that podcast happened to say that when Joseph Smith received the plates, the very week or the very day that he received the plates, Brigham Young had this vision of angels coming to the earth. And so the Lord here is in control, and it's the Lord's timing that we have to follow. He also spoke about a time when he was in Idaho picking up his son from a mission, and he got a phone call. And on the phone call said, "Hi, this is Elder Perry." And he was not prepared to. It's the only time he's ever received a phone call from an apostle. And he said, "You mean L. Tom Perry?" And he almost dropped the phone. And so they were talking about some church things that he was affiliated with. But he had been asked to contribute to an article that the church was writing on race in the priesthood. And when he was talking to Elder Perry, he realized in that instant that Elder Perry was in the room in 1978 when the revelation was discussed by the Quorum of the 12. And then so L. Tom Perry related to him the experience that they had in that upper room of the temple, and then how they all knew that it was time and that the Lord had directed him. And then he included that in his particular article. And then he bore his testimony about how the timing was so important. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the timing. And then if you read in Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verse 68, it says, "And it shall be in his own time, in his own way, and according to his own will." So let's talk about the restrictions on the priesthood. The very, very first thing that the church now recognizes and says is we don't know why the restrictions began, and that you get into trouble theorizing or speculating on the why. In fact, President Oakes gave a talk where he said we were spectacularly wrong In fact, on Sunday, we talked about Bruce R. McConkie leading a discussion with new seminary teachers, new institute teachers, where he said in his talk in August, right after the June, when this particular restriction on the priesthood was lifted, that forget everything that I ever said, because he was very famous for being outspoken about certain things, and they were published in Mormon doctrine. And there were other brethren over the last 150 years who are very vocal about ideas and thoughts. And he said, forget about all that, because once the prophet speaks, it doesn't matter what anybody else said before. The Lord will explain in his own good time the why. We don't need to worry about it. But moving forward, we need to create this culture of oneness to prepare us for the second coming of Christ. And then he quoted 2 Nephi 26:33. All are alike unto God, including black and white, bond and free, male and female. Steve wrote, the revelation was announced while I was on my mission. My mission president had taught us not to teach blacks prior to that time. He said it was not their time. And that's true. I remember I was on a mission as well when the announcement was made. I was in Palermo in Sicily. And I remember picking up a newspaper and reading the headlines and saying, wow, amazing. But we do live in an amazing time when things are opening up. Different things are happening. We have seen amazing things, and we will continue to see amazing things develop. In this podcast that I listened to, Brother Corbett, he said, the Book of Mormon teaches us to be on the lookout for those that stir up conflict among people of another culture or race to gain power. He, in particular, when he was teaching his children, he said that the thing that happened in the Book of Mormon that talks about the skin of blackness that came upon Lehi's family was a very family thing related to the Jewish people and has nothing to do with his black skin and his children's black skin. He said that it's completely a different thing and we shouldn't be confused about it. And then he goes on to look at, in particular in Alma, some of the things that happen with the dissenters. And he said, we need to be on the lookout for people who are causing dissension in order to gain power. And he talked specifically about Amalickiah, who inspired the hearts of the Lamanites in Alma 48 and appointed men to speak from their towers against the Nephites. And he said, what are the towers that we have today? Well, that's, the telecommunication that we have, the internet. He said, and be very, very, very conscious of people who try to stir up this difficulties because the conflict in order to gain power. He says the Book of Mormon was written for our day today, and that we can't be caught in the same trap that the other people had been caught into. And he goes through, and I've included some of these other scriptures here. Alma 43:8, for behold, his design was to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites, that he might usurp great power over them, and that he might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them into bondage. He said this kind of conflict that occurs only is a negative thing, and we need to be very, very careful of it, even today. We have a comment written in here from Steve. When the church came out and said they didn't know why blacks had been restricted, the statement troubled me. Why didn't they know why? Then I went to the temple and spoke with, I don't know who that is, who is manning the reception. Can't recall our conversation, but I thought at the time that he didn't have an issue with it, and then I had no reason either. So I just put it aside. And that's true. We don't necessarily have to know the why. There was a talk that I was reading this week. I think I talked about it on our Sunday session, that if you go through the scriptures, 1 in 100 times the Lord gives a commandment, he tells us why. The other 99 times we never know why. And that's not the point. The point is to exercise your faith and to do what the Lord wants you to do. You'll get the why later. Did you ever have kids that wanted to know why on everything? Used to drive me crazy some days. Why? And then you'd give them the answer and they'd say, why? Well, the Lord doesn't want to play that game, and he doesn't play that game. Does anybody know Dale LeBaron? I was very fortunate. When I lived in Edmonton, I met Dale LeBaron when I was young. He was a professor at BYU, a professor of history, and he was also a mission president in South Africa. In 2001, and I would really recommend you go and listen to this talk. that he gave an education week in 2001. He was a mission president in South Africa. And for a long time, South Africa was the only part of Africa that had the church officially there. But he tells the story about Africa. I've included the link there, and I'll include it in the cover section when I produce the video. But if you listen to this video, it's about an hour long. Make sure you have a box of Kleenex with you. I'll just give you that warning. In 1940s, church headquarters started receiving letters from Western Africa begging for missionaries to come and to teach the people. And then it got to a point that there were more letters received from West Africa than all the rest of the world to the First Presidency. They went on this mail writing campaign. So the church sent Glenn G. Fisher there to investigate in 1960. He landed and he talked to him. He met a pastor there who had 5,000 people ready for baptism. In 1960, 5,000 people ready for baptism. He was a pastor of another church, but he had somehow got a copy of the Book of Mormon from expatriates that were working in the area. He knew it to be the word of God. He knew that Joseph Smith was a prophet. He knew that there were prophets on the earth. He talked to everybody in his congregation all around him, and there were 5,000 people ready to be baptized. Then in 1961, Lamar Williams, who was the head of the international mission, was sent there for 1 month. And when he landed at the airport, there were 10 pastors that met him, each with congregations, and they were not aware of each other. And they all knew that the church was true. They too had received partial books and copies of Book of Mormon's. Very first official meeting was the 22nd of October, 1961 in West Africa. The meeting lasted for 2 hours, which Lamar Williams was in charge of. And then as he went to dismiss the group, there was this loud sound that came out from amongst the people. And his interpreter said they don't want to go home. And they had this impromptu testimony meeting for 3 hours, where people came forward and expressed their desire to be baptized into the church. In particular, he was moved by one man who was quite advanced in years, who came up and bore his testimony. And he said, I can't remember if he said 16 or 26 miles to get here today. And I'm not a very healthy man. He said, I'm quite ill, but I want to testify to you what I know. And I want you to personally deliver to the prophet this desire that we are serious, that we know about the restrictions of the priesthood, but it doesn't matter. We still know that this is the true church and we want to be baptized. And then he said, I still have however many miles to walk home, but I don't care. When I found out that you were coming, I had to be here. Then in 1964, there were some members that got together and incorporated the name of the church. And they took a poll and they had 15,000 people ready for baptism. And Brother LeBaron was saying in his talk that the church was very seriously looking at and trying to get the church established, but then a civil war started that lasted many years. That it was right in the area which was the biggest population of people who wanted to join the church. It says most times the church is looking for people desperately, for the missionaries to teach. But this was the first time in the history of what he said was the modern era when people were begging for missionaries to come to teach them and baptize them. And they were just flooding the First Presidency with letters. Here's some of the pictures you can see here. This was the Latter-day Saint bookshop. They couldn't get any missionaries there, so the church just kept sending them more and more books. So they set up 2 bookstores. And when they came to church, they had to bring their own benches. Many of them would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to walk to church and carry their bench with them. There were all kinds of little chapels everywhere that were not authorized, they called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was the very first meeting where there were 100 saints who came. And then in 1988, President Hinckley was the first prophet to visit that part of the world. And so if you want a very interesting story about what happens in Africa or what's happening in Africa, you can start with that particular talk that was just amazing. A couple of years after 1978, when the restrictions were lifted, they were having kind of a general conference, a mission conference. And Brother Jude Impey was asked to bear his testimony. He was one of the original pioneers. And he said he had a dream when he bore his testimony. He said, I have had a dream many years ago that I did not understand until this very moment. And in that dream, we were in a great gathering like this. And there was an organ playing music, but the music was terrible. Everybody was complaining about how horrid the music was. And then they realized all together at once that the organist was only playing on the white keys. He said, now we're playing on all the keys and the music is so much sweeter. When you look at this official declaration number 2 and you read through it, President of the church who brought this about was literally prepared to do this. As a young boy, he talks about being concerned for the Native Americans who he felt were being discriminated against. And he lived through this time until in 1978, he said, aware of the promises made by the prophets and the presidents of the church who have preceded us at some time, in God's eternal plan, all of our brethren who are worthy may receive the priesthood. And witnessing the faithfulness of those from whom the priesthood has been withheld, those thousands of letters that came in from Africa. We have pleaded long and earnestly in behalf of these our faithful brethren, spending many hours in the upper room of the temple, supplicating the Lord for divine guidance. And so I repeat what I said earlier, is that we don't know why. And maybe one day the Lord will tell us why. But we do know that he's in charge, that there are prophets and apostles that lead the church. And this is what I want everybody to know, is that Jesus Christ leads this church. And we just have to have the faith to follow the commandments that he gives. But not only just that faith, but we also need to be able to receive these kinds of revelations that are important in our life and the inspiration that we need so that we can survive in these latter days, because it's necessary. We can't afford to lose the Spirit. We just can't afford it. And having said that, I will turn the time back to Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Again, a very, very nice lesson, a lot to ponder over and to think about.
The one thing I was going to announce is that there aren't very many weeks left as far as studying the Doctrine and Covenants, but I will not be doing any broadcasts over the Christmas time period. I'm taking the week off. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Well, you deserve that week off, Carl.
Well, I figure 1 week a year I should take off.
Yeah, no, that's good. So I guess I'll give the closing prayer then. We'll close that way.